Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the CFAL York Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the 17th session of our VR/XR Training and Education Knowledge and Experience Sharing Speaker Series, presented in collaboration with the DexR Lab at York University. I will begin today with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Tekaronto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. The territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event and our participants may be joining from various locations, I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I welcome our moderator, our speaker, and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Ahmad Mohammadi. Dr. Ahmad Mohammadi is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Civil Engineering at York University in Toronto, Ontario, where he received his PhD in transportation engineering. His research focuses on applications of virtual reality in transportation safety, traffic conflict analysis, and traffic microsimulation modeling. His research contributes to improving transportation safety and efficiency. Ahmad is also the coordinator of the Disaster and Emergency Extended Virtual Reality, or DEXR laboratory at York University. Dr. Mohammadi, thank you very much for moderating today's session and your ongoing collaboration in the series. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another virtual reality session and the application in education. Today, I would like to introduce Dr. Daniel Hawes from Carleton University. Daniel is a writer, producer, academic researcher, and technology entrepreneur. He has produced a vast array of content, including 12 animated TV series, 50 games, 9 movies, and several artificial intelligence and virtual reality applications. As an adjunct research professor in the School of Information Technology, IT at Carleton University, his work marries the worlds of technological entrepreneurship and academic research. He also teaches courses related to game design, digital storytelling, and managing the creative companies at Carleton and Toronto Metropolitan University. Daniel and his team have been delivering university courses in fully immersive VR since 2021. Okay, so without further ado, I am passing the discussion to our speaker, Professor Daniel. Please start.
Thanks, Ahmad. I guess I'll start by sharing my screen. Are we good? Does that, can people see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, if anybody has any specific questions during the presentation, I guess because I'm not monitoring anything other than what's on screen, maybe just shout out with audio. I don't mind that. So I call this presentation Prime Time, using virtual reality experience priming to improve student mindsets and academic performance in post-secondary students. I did this as part of a research team with Dr. Ali Arya, who is based out of Carleton University. So quick presentation overview. We'll talk a little bit about the background and the problem. We'll share some of the results from the research studies that we did, and based on that, what we learned, and talk just a bit about the future. So the general significance and mindset, one of the things that we discovered back in 2017 when we did a lot of this research was that there were high levels of student anxiety. I won't get into the numbers, but they were really quite disconcerting. And we thought, what could we do to address that problem? So that was sort of the precipitating problem. And roughly at the same time, there was a lot of literature that was current related to the idea of counterproductive mindsets. Scarcity testing on academic performance, for example, was one of the things that was relevant. And there was all this new talk about technology like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, biometrics, and the potential to transform education, which is part of why we're here today. So we define the problem as really the negative effect of counterproductive mindsets on educational activities, and also the limited use of technology like VR. Like nobody really managed to figure out, there was a lot of talk about how technologies like VR could improve the situation, but there wasn't anything really done, and there was no real empirical evidence of this. So our literature review, we touched on counterproductive mindsets. We sort of define this as scarcity, which I'll talk about that in a second. The idea of cognitive and affective priming, so using priming methodologies, which comes from cognitive science and social psychology, and to some extent behavioral economics, learning theories and mindsets, and technology solutions. So we defined these, I guess, what you'd call dysfunctional mindsets or counterproductive mindsets as part of a scarcity mindset. So things like chronic anxiety, cognitive biases, limited learning mindsets, like closed mindsets, stereotype threats, and even just plain scarcity thinking as a scarcity mindset. So just shout out to these guys who did the book. Sendil Malhotrain and Eldar Shafir wrote a book called Scarcity, Why Having So Little Means So Much, where they tested people in varying scenarios. And what it turned out was when people were primed, I won't get into the details of the study, but I highly recommend this book. But when people were primed with specific cues that made them feel less or put them in scarcity mindset, the quality, the performance on academic tests, in their case, they were using the Raven's Progressive Matrix test, which was a test of fluid intelligence, was dropped by almost an entire 13 points, which is like one level of IQ. So they started to try and understand what could be done to change that. And I believe Mullainathan was part of the poverty team that I guess it was back in the it was the Democratic team with Obama, I believe. That's when he was sort of headed up the poverty team at for the Democratic Party. Anyway, a couple other references that people might want to take a look at to understand just the powerful effects of priming. Quickly, what is priming? So people understand, not everybody has a background in social psychology. So it's really a psychological phenomenon where exposure to a stimulus influences how you respond to a subsequent related stimulus. So it often happens and is most effective when it's unconscious, and our thoughts and perceptions may change in ways, and even your behavior will change to different ways. So for example, if the word yellow, you might be quicker to recognize the word banana in text because your brain has been primed to associate the two. So I wanted to share this little video. I literally came across it yesterday. And after you watch the video, I'll share something that helps you understand why virtual reality and the metaverse are so profound and they could affect our lives in the future. So this is just a short video, but I think you'll find it enlightening about the effects of priming. So here we go.
I invited 2 members of MBA, an advertising agency, to a secret location to propose an unusual task. Those who work in advertising are masters of persuasion. They subtly weave their images and slogans into our daily lives, knowing that we will register so much unconsciously. And then we walk into a supermarket and feel a sense of familiarity with a product we think we've never heard of. Millions of pounds a year are spent on it.
Oh, there was a problem. I think, let's just see here.
Yes, we don't see the
Yeah,
power.
it just crashed. Sorry about that.
No worries.
That's strange. Okay. Now let me see if I can reshare my screen.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah,
you have.
let me share. Yeah, I'm not sure why. It appears that PowerPoint died for some reason, so profuse apologies. And
No worries.
Really work with your first
Works now.
instance.
sorry, it was,
And Martin?
I think it
Year
was
spent
here.
on it. It's brilliantly calculated.
Is that coming across okay on your end, Ahmad?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I turn the tables on the advertising experts. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen. Tony, yes? Yeah, that's fine. And Martin? Yeah. Hi, I'm Darren. Let me get down to explaining exactly what I want you to do. Imagine that I'm opening a chain of stores selling a product, something I have a particular interest in. Your task is to come up with a poster advertising that store. And that poster must include the company name, whatever you decide that may be. It must include a strap line, some sort of slogan, and some kind of logo as well, some kind of visual image. Now, the idea is you've only got half an hour to do this, so you're going to really work with your first instinct. So at the moment, you've got no idea what you're going to do, correct? No. Excellent. I'm also going to give you this. I've had a few design ideas of my own. We'll leave this untouched. We'll come back to that later. All right? Are there any questions? What's the product? What's the product? Very good question. Passion of mine since I was a toddler. It's a chain of taxidermy stores. Let me pop the pussycat on the envelope so it remains untouched. You have half an hour, gentlemen. Good luck. Thanks. It's tough to do. Wings. Or could you create some more quality that says like nice, positive effect on animals? Animals go. And we have great. And we have where the best animals go to. Well, the clouds with animals. Us, guys, yeah. Only the best getting for it. Yeah. Where do animals go to? Where the best fight for dead animals. Typical. Time up, gentlemen. I can't wait to sit you down. Come and show me. Okay. And Tony, before we do this, can you take the envelope I gave you earlier? Okay. And can you please vouch for us here that no one's been anywhere near it? It's been under a dead cat. No one's touched it. That's right. That's the truth. That's the truth. Keep on it. Come around here. Now, before we have a look at it, just tell me, what was it like? We started off thinking about the name. We thought that was probably the best thing to do. Sure. And then take it from there. We banged out a lot of ones that were probably completely stupid, and then got down to the ones that were slightly stupid, and then we kind of that went back and forth for a bit, and then kind of got something we liked and developed it. You can have a look. Sure. Is this it? Yeah. That's fantastic. It's a bear with a liar. So it's animal heaven, the best place for dead animals. And it's obviously, you'd see that it was stuffed. How did you come up with the name Animal Heaven? We had the idea of the pearly gates of heaven being the zoo gates. Zoo gates as the gates of heaven, that's interesting. I.e. sort of all the animals that are dead are in a dead zoo, if you like, in heaven. And then we just kind of thought, well, it's kind of nice, but it's a bit twee. We wanted to make it a bit funkier. And then we thought Harp Playing Bear just answered the brief. That's fantastic. I do want to show you my own ideas from beforehand. Okay. I don't want to touch. Would you open them for me? Sure. I think you find this interesting. The envelope. Yeah, sorry. All right, not a million miles away. Let me put this up there. Hang on to that. It's a Harp Playing Bear. Yeah. God. You've gone For these angel wings here, were you thinking of angel wings or bird wings?
Yeah, well, they were kind of a combination.
You did them a lot better than me. This was the same thing. I was thinking angel wings there. You got animal heaven. I got creature heaven.
Yeah.
We're the best.
A bit off there then.
A bit off there. Where the best dead animals go. Did you put blessed place with dead animals? I had the idea of a zoo gate on there.
It was hard to leave. We didn't like the way it was hard to leave out, but this was just a bit too much.
Can I see your other the other one you were talking about?
Yeah, it's just before that.
Is it very different?
Well, it's just the gates. Yeah.
Oh, gentlemen, please.
We're doing quite similar.
Look at that. This was the image I was thinking. I've done it there in the background because this to me was the more striking image. And interestingly, you abandoned this for this one. This was
but the first bear I drew looks exactly like that one. Actually, it did, yeah.
The first bear you drew.
Yeah, shall I show you on the notes?
Shelley, what have we got?
Well, this is scary, really. But,
oh, look at that. Yeah. Look at that. You've got the cloud. You've got the blue. If you knew the amount of effort we've gone into making this work, you'd be absolutely flabbergasted. But for now, it's comforting to know that you're just as susceptible to subliminal persuasion as the rest of us. Thank you very much for helping us out. Chloe, Martin,
pleasure.
take care. Thank you very much.
That was quite cynical. And when I saw the bear and I saw a cloud, first of all, from behind the paper, I thought hanging this close here. And then when we saw the rest of it, I couldn't believe it.
I immediately thought, oh, I'm gutted. I could see that it was folded, and I just saw the bear's foot hanging over the cloud with a harp.
Yeah.
I just thought, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was
How embarrassing.
But now I think, oh, fantastic. Yeah. Now I'm over the moon.
I mean, yeah. We're obviously we're pleased for him.
Yeah.
So now they show how it's done.
He comes out this looking good.
Very compelling.
To see how we did it, watch their taxi journey again.
Put a spell on you.
Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Sorry. So the interesting thing is that that was a situation where they went through a lot of trouble to prime those people. They picked them up in the cab. They brought them to the location, and they did all sorts of things. They put signs up, and all of those things that they used to he said he used the term subliminal. It was actually supraliminal. Supraliminal is when you actually see something. You may not be aware that you're seeing it, but you're being primed. But you see the power of what they did. And these guys were people that were supposedly somewhat cognitively aware. These were two of the top ad executives in London. So it makes us realize that for something like virtual reality, where we could do that systematically, customize and personalize something, you realize why Meta is so passionate about going after this space as an advertising medium, because you have the opportunity to affect people in ways that we don't even realize how profound it is. So that's one of the things that sort of got me excited about this whole space, is the power of such subtle priming techniques. And the thought was, what if we could use this power of priming in an educational context? What if we could do things that prime people in ways that are positive and help alleviate some of that student anxiety and improve their cognitive bandwidth? So we referred to priming in an educational context as any intentional action or stimulus, cognitive or affective, that strives to improve student learning mindset or cognition in general. And why was VR so important? I think we understand, for those who work in VR, that using customization and personalization with artificial intelligence, it becomes a very, very powerful medium for priming. But also, we can create scenarios that are otherwise not possible. We can create simulations. We can create customized classrooms. We can create new worlds that meet the needs of what we're trying to teach. The designers can customize, personalize in real time, right? It's also a procedural computational platform. And people have, in fact, an increased feeling of presence and authenticity. So if properly designed, a virtual reality space has the ability to enhance those psychological effects. So when we put it all together, there were three key things that we're going to go into our model. One is that we knew that VR was a disruptive technology solution. When I say VR, but I'm talking about VR in conjunction with things like biometrics and artificial intelligence. We knew that there were powerful psychological insights that we could build upon the idea of priming. And we could use, and we thought, you know, because this was essentially an experiential type of learning process that you would encounter within a virtual space, we focused on experiential learning. So we tried to build a model based on ELT, experiential learning technology. So some key insights that we had from the literature review, we classified, and this is how we got to the whole scarcity mindset, these different dysfunctional mindsets. We classified that as scarcity mindset. And there was evidence that you could reduce scarcity by doing things to prime abundance thinking or a more positive mindset. We also realized that priming interventions are not one-shot antidotes, but they can be applied throughout a process. And we realized that virtual reality affordances were a wonderful priming substrate to achieve maximal priming effects. So we created this scarcity framework, and we chose 4 different priming methods. The first priming method is something we call preparatory experience priming. So this is something that we do before we go into a session, so before a class. So much like a coach might try to motivate people, a team, before they get out in the field, it could be that pep talk, but it's something that you do before the actual activity. So we called that a preparatory experience prime. The second was context-oriented prime. So we changed the context of the environment. It could be making a space more creative. It could be with unique avatars. It could be through lighting or sound, but you change the context of the environment. The next was motivation-oriented priming. We called them MOPS. So they were motivational messages that could be presented. They could be presented in the context of a room, but it was, again, all of these priming activities were meant to be superliminal. In other words, you were able to see it. You weren't necessarily aware that it was happening, but it was presented in your environment, in the virtual reality environment. And then reflective-oriented priming. And this was to meet in the experiential learning cycle, there's a point of reflection. So we would do things to prime a reflective activity. So that was the idea there. So we created this cyclical priming methodology where on one side we had a scarcity mindset where we show the available cognitive bandwidth in the red and various types of things that essentially appropriate that cognitive bandwidth. We have a model in the middle that shows that when you use these two things, the insights from, the technology insights, the cognitive and priming insights, our learning theories and motivational mindsets, you can create priming interventions, the 4 that I mentioned. And the intent is to create a more of an abundance mindset. So we see on the right, the available cognitive bandwidth has increased. Now that we're not saying that people are becoming smarter at all. Our claim is just that we're more cognitively available and we're performing better because we've reduced some of those effects through priming activities. So we also, and I won't get into this in detail, but we showed how these could be applied within the experiential learning cycle. So generally, within the cycle, you have a concrete experience, then there's a reflective observation. We have a period of abstract conceptualization, active experimentation, and then you reiterate back into a concrete experience. So we showed where each of these primes might exist. So the preparatory experience prime would happen before the actual event or the learning experience. The motivation-oriented prime would happen at the time of the event or in the context of the event, as would context-oriented priming, right? And then you could do reflective priming at any point within the cycle, anything that's used to induce thought and, you know, contemplation. We also defined the virtual reality implementation of this cyclical priming model as virtual reality experience priming. So it was really just a VR implementation of the CPM model. So our research questions were, do VR-based preparatory experiences? We thought let's take that one first to see if we could prove it in. Do they actually reduce anxiety? Because that was one of the things we were targeted to do. Do they increase cognitive bandwidth and ultimately academic performance? And how effective is VR-based context-oriented priming to reduce anxiety, increase cognitive advantage in context-oriented priming? So we tried the two first priming methods. The first was focused on events happening before the learning experience. The second was within the context of the experience. So study one was VR-based student priming to reduce anxiety and increase cognitive bandwidth. So you'll see up top, there are two examples. For the anxiety model, we built basically a virtual reality space where you would be on a mountaintop overseeing, and you can see some of what people were viewing. And they were given a 5-minute meditation. It was a guided meditation. And the other example that we tested was gaming. So we used the Beat Saber game, which was quite an interesting game. Many of you have probably played it. If you've spent a lot of time in VR, you've probably played it. But it was something that I thought, wow, I feel better after the game. I feel pumped. I feel energized. So we were curious about that as well. So our Pilot 1 study, our 1A, we tested a bunch of people, about a dozen people playing Beat Saber. And we tested them for anxiety and for cognitive bandwidth, and we found some good results. So we proceeded to study 1B, where I believe we had 64. I should have put that in. I believe we had 64 participants in that study, and we studied anxiety and cognitive bandwidth. And I might note that we could not get access to the RPM or the Raven's progressive matrices test, which is something that psychologists use. But there was something similar for academia called the University of California Matrix Reasoning Test, which is almost identical, and they make it available for public domain. So we used that test, and it was applied before and after. So that test is essentially a test of fluid intelligence. So it's the one aspect of an IQ test that has no dependence on what you might have learned before. There's no cultural influences. So it's a test of fluid intelligence. So here are the study results. For meditation and gaming, the UCMRT scores were significant. We achieved significance in those scores. So you'll see the gaming, I don't know if I have so you'll see the gaming scores were slightly above the prime versus no prime, and the meditation, we saw prime versus no prime, but the meditation didn't see much upside in terms of the academic score or the UCMRT score. Both had positive anxiety scores. So in other words, both of these processes reduced anxiety, but only gaming increased cognitive bandwidth. So basically what we learned in summary, both VR conditions reduced anxiety. The VR video game condition, we observed an increase in cognitive performance. VR meditation did not observe an increase in cognitive performance. And something that was relevant in the documentation and a lot of the research was that sometimes a high anxiety learner might benefit more than a low anxiety learner from these types of activities, but we did not, in our particular study did not observe performance increase there. So study 2 was focused on context-oriented priming. So we compared a classroom theater. We took a standard classroom theater, and some people ask us, well, why didn't you compare it to a real world space? And we didn't, because there was plenty of evidence that you can prime in real world spaces. So we thought, okay, is this actually transferable? One of the things we were testing for was, are these priming effects that, there's empirical evidence in live action, are they actually transferable to these classrooms? And we found that they were actually transferable. In fact, that the VR classroom theater prime versus no prime conditions yielded some very interesting results. So in both cases, the prime conditions, so we had 3 classrooms. One was a plain theater. The other one was an animation studio. So we designed it to be like an animation studio. So when you were learning the course, you were in the actual animation studio. The other one was the same VR classroom, but it was full of VR artifacts that were related to animation and iconic animation figures. And you were presented a 30-minute course. So we observed higher academic scores in both of the prime conditions. So do we have what we've learned here? Sorry, I don't have the what should reorganize this line. Anyway, we observed in both conditions, the VR classroom and the VR studio, higher academic performance. What was interesting and what was consistent with the literature was that we also measured for state trait anxiety inventory. So we measured for anxiety, and we measured for both positive and negative affect with the PANIS study. And we saw very little change. So there was no significance in the effective results. So in the case of the gaming, for example, the gaming effect and in the meditation, we saw reduced anxiety. We did not see this in the changing conditions, the context changes, which is consistent because it was really a priming activity that people essentially are not that aware of. They're not aware that they're being primed to be in the mode of somebody learning about anxiety. Yeah, so the study 2B was, I wonder how it compares if you're on a desktop versus being within the space. So is there a value in that immersive activity? And we noticed that the priming effect worked both within the immersive space and on the desktop device. So desktop VR and IVR had very similar capabilities. So what we learned was in the prime versus no prime conditions, we observed significance in both the IVR and DVR environments. Neither prime or no prime conditions observed improvement in affect or subjective UX. That was another thing we studied about. And neither DVR or IVR observed improved affect or improved subjective UX relative to each other. So there was a performance increase, but people were not cognitively or effectively aware of that. So those are the essential studies. So the future, so based on those studies and what we had learned, which was essentially that, yes, the priming effects that people have observed in behavioral psychology and behavioral economics over the years are now transferable to VR. So we validated that. And so where do we go in the future? So the thought was, well, what if we identified more cognitive and effective priming strategies? So we identified other strategies beyond the preparatory prime and the context-oriented prime. We identified pro-social inclusiveness prime. So for example, in a VR space, if I'm in a virtual university space, maybe I overload with participants who are, maybe not as well represented. So if I add avatars that are more relevant to my background, if I'm Black and I want to feel more at home, so I add more avatars that are more inclusive. And we also talked about motivation priming, different forms of direct attentional priming. Anyway, I'll leave you can look at those at your leisure. And we also suggested where they might sit in the experiential learning cycle. And we also, and this can be for reference later, identified different priming opportunities in VR, different types of subjects. So we could change the subject matter, we could prime and study different personality types, we could prime varying group densities. So there's so many different conditions that you can change to affect the priming process. And other methods of context priming. So these are things that we didn't do, but you can, bring people into a nature environment. And that has there's lots of evidence that suggests that that has a very positive priming effect. And these are just other methods that you might consider. And that's it for the presentation.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor.
Any questions?
Daniel? Yes. So if there is any questions then from the audiences, then they can please feel free to ask. You can just write down in the chat. In the meantime, yes, maybe we have. I'm not sure if. Yeah. So while the participant is asking the questions or thinking to ask the questions, so I have a question. I have few questions, Dr. Daniel.
Okay.
I'm asking this question to almost every so let me check the chat.
Okay, yeah.
The video will be posted a few hours after that. Okay, yeah. So I'm asking this question to almost our speakers is about the simulation sickness. So you talked about anxiety and then and the technical study that you have done. The simulation sickness is how do you basically have you considered the simulation sickness in your study? How was your experiences about this simulation sickness, which can significantly affect the results of a study, or even just forget about the study, even in the class, right?
Yeah.
So we want to provide, for example, some experiences to the students, and then all of a sudden they feel headache or
Right.
how you want to handle as an expert in this area, how you're handling this.
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, throughout the studies, all these studies that we referred to, there were about 125 participants in total that went through the process. And the percentage of people that experienced what you would call, severe cybernausea was roughly 3%. Now, 30% experienced some form of uneasiness, like maybe it's just a discomfort or something, but not enough to leave the event. They were fine to continue. So 30% of those participants did experience some adverse effects, some awkwardness, however they described it. But we found that there were only 3% of people that were affected. So yeah, I mean, in some cases, certain people just have challenges with their vestibular system, and there's not that much you can do. Now, some of so we've been doing it, I've been running courses within virtual reality since 2021, and we've been doing it at both Carleton and Toronto Metropolitan University. And believe it or not, we didn't have too many issues. We were very careful to design our environments to have more than 60 frames per second. I find a lot of the experiences in virtual reality that cause cybernausea tend to be failure at the basics. They either move cameras really quickly to create discontinuity, You'll see that if you go to YouTube VR 360, I mean, you can get sick pretty quickly in that. And I'm the same. So we're careful to design to specifications so that your frames per second are above 60, and we don't do anything crazy with the camera. We tend to be very controlled. And, you know, if you look at things like Beat Saber, they've been very successful. There are very, very low incidences of, and I think they're under 1%, but there are people that will go in and be affected by it, which is why we have a desktop version. So if people are not able to do the VR version, the immersive version, they do use the desktop version. But I find as processing power improves in the headset and you can increase the specifications and reduce any sort of latency, whenever you have latency of any sort, it tends to be the thing that is somewhat problematic. So if we can keep the frame rate up over 60, if we can reduce latency, if you're showing content or you're taking people through a content experience, avoid rapid camera moves. So that's typically how we've dealt with it. Hope
Okay.
that helps.
Okay, so one question from the participant is, can you share a link to your original study if it's published, maybe?
Yeah, so yeah, all of these studies are published on the opening page. If you go right to the opening page, you can download those from Google Scholar. Right on the front page where it says prime time, I have both of those studies and some of the research theory behind it. So it's right on the front page. If you want me to, here, I'll share the screen. But I can just cut and paste those into a link here. Actually, maybe I'll do that. That might be easier. Let me just kill that. Sorry. So those are the three main studies so you can pull those down from Google Scholar if you'd like. And then the other one was just off of YouTube. And I think somebody already shared that link to that video. Yeah. Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me just. I'll find the video link too while we're at it here. That was a York link. Okay. So that was the YouTube link of that ad where they basically primed those two ad executives.
Okay.
Thank you again. I know we just.
Okay, so for maybe because people cannot simply copy paste the papers from the Zoom, that's the limitation of the Zoom. But for your information, maybe you can go through the Google Scholar and then search. I believe it's you, right, Daniel?
Yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Then search Daniel Hawes, and then this page will come, and then the publication is basically there, because you cannot copy paste from the Zoom. That's odd, but still that's the thing. So yeah. So one question from Tanya is, hi, it's Tanya Clint from Clint Content. I'm a transmedia producer and educator working in animation, series, and gaming.
Okay.
The question is, what type of testing products did you create? So this is the first question. So maybe you can answer this and then we can move to the next question, because
Sure. Yeah, so for the actual gaming aspect, we didn't create anything new. We used the thought was something like Beat Saber would be so much better than what we could create, and it was available. So we used Beat Saber for the gaming tests, but for the animation series and for we created our own virtual university, for lack of a better term. It's called Campus VR. We have it. It's based on Unreal Engine, and we have many different spaces within the virtual university. And if you want, I can give you access to it. So we tend to share it with academics if people want to use it. Yeah, and it's basically it's a cloud-based back-end infrastructure. The front end is done with Unreal Engine. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. The second question, do you see games and animation in XR making a greater impact in animation education and optimal well-being? Well, for my business, we actually we do an animated TV series that we're bringing back this year. It was called Chili Beach, and it's kind of like a South Park-like grungy animation, and it was quite popular in Canada in the early 2000s. And we've built a virtual Chili Beach in our virtual reality university. So that's where we're actually shooting a lot of the shots. So we composite the shots in 2D, and we use various technology to do that. And then we animate the shots in 2D. Then we use various technologies to recomposite it back into Unreal Engine into that virtual world space. So yeah, XR is definitely going to be very relevant. In that case, that's within the production environment. So are you creating animation games and series for education in XR? You know, that's my pet peeve. There's a lot of money being spent on these headsets, but not a lot in creating actual animation content. So I've created a couple little courses that I would say are somewhat immersive, but most of those courses are really 2D stuff that's overlaid into 3D because it's actually quite expensive to create 3D content. So that is something that I would love to do, and it's something that we're passionate about, but it's also very expensive to create immersive content today. But I think that's one of the things that needs to happen. So those are all great questions. And it sounds like you're I guess, animation educator. I'm going to basically like to find out more about that. Actually, September 24th in Ottawa, my partner, Ali Arya, might be involved in that because he's doing lots of stuff with the Indigenous communities. Tanya, where are you based out of? Oh, okay. You're the same as me. I'm based out of Toronto and Ottawa too. So I'll leave you there's my email address. So if you just contact me and I'll set you up to give you access to the virtual reality university. Oh, thanks, Francesco. All right.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'm kind of lost. Well, I was checking the papers and then the few
Okay.
links here. So yeah, someone asked about the PowerPoint slides. I'm not sure if you can share later on the PowerPoint.
Yes.
But we have the video recorded. We will put in the YouTube channel because many person might not have the opportunity to join, but later on they can watch. But if you can also share, then
Yeah, I'll share it as a PDF and you'll have the video anyway. So, and you have the link to the YouTube video. That's the only video in it. But yeah, I'll share it right after the session.
yes, and so
Yeah.
Francesco is just saying if anyone would like to the slides, please email me at the Francesco. The email is there basically.
Great.
Okay, so I have another questions because we have still time until 1.
Okay.
So just for people that might not come from a technical background, the DVR, you mean the desktop, the two-dimensional, like the display or normal display, and IVR means the headsets.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the term that we use in sort of our kind of vernacular, it's DVR is desktop VR, and IVR is immersive VR. So immersive VR would be within a headset, so fully immersive. Yeah.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, one question from Mehdi Safari is, Dear Professor, thank you for the excellent presentation regarding effective and psychomotor goals. How much can your study cover the goals? In what dimensions can it develop?
So I don't, is there a
Yeah,
text?
so maybe you can read the questions.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it in the chat here. Maybe I'm missing. Oh, maybe.
It's in open. Or maybe I can read it again for you.
Yeah, I'm looking for webinar chat, but I'm seeing Tanya's, but that's strange. Maybe
Yeah, so
It's in the
oh, maybe
Q&A,
it's
not in
it's
the,
under Q&A.
yeah,
Okay,
not
I
in the
got it.
chat.
okay, I'm just
There we go.
copy paste again. Yeah.
Regarding affective and psychomotor goals, how can your study cover these goals? In what dimensions can it develop? Yeah, it's interesting. We didn't really get into psychomotor goals with this study, but the affective element was actually a big component of it, and that's part of what drove the initial, motivation. So we did for the affective element, we measured really. We measured anxiety because that was a big problem with students, still is, by the way. So we used the state trait anxiety inventory, and then we also did the positive and negative affect studies, the PANIS studies. So those met the goals in that was something that was relevant to corresponding with the academic performance. So we also wanted to find out if if there was a correspondence or a correlation between, if you reduce anxiety, does it actually increase cognitive bandwidth? It turns out there isn't a direct correlation. So by reducing anxiety, you don't actually increase cognitive bandwidth. They are correlation. They do correlate, but it's not specifically. So there are cases when anxiety is reduced and there is no actual corresponding cognitive improvement, which was the case in the meditation study, right? So we did have a reduced anxiety, but there was no actual improvement in cognition in that particular study. Now, also you have to understand that we had a very limited set of, we had limited resources. So to do studies to do with things like meditation, you really need longer term studies. So there needs to be more longitudinal studies to determine whether, after 3 or 4 sessions, people develop more sort of cognitive abilities through that through that improved affect. So in what dimensions can it develop? I don't quite understand that part. I don't know. What do you mean by what dimensions are you suggesting?
Okay, so in the meantime that maybe Mehdi is writing, then I can ask on another question is, what do you see in future for VR in the classrooms? What I'm talking is about currently in the university part, we are using VR more to do some experiments, collecting such data. And then, but what about as a part of the courses to teach? I know it's very difficult to do it, but do you have any experience basically to grab a part of the courses and then implement it in VR, Dr. Daniel?
Well, absolutely. Like, I think, first of all, I think VR will be the classroom. I mean, it seems like a very simple use case, but let's take Ryerson or Toronto Metropolitan University. It's very expensive to live in downtown Toronto. So a lot of the people take public transit. So some of my students would literally take 2 hours to get there, 2 hours to get back. This is 4 hours of unproductive time on public transit. And we could put you know, a VR headset in and simulate almost all of the activities. Now, it may have seemed like it was mundane because it was me presenting in a lecture hall, and, you know, it looked a lot like a classroom, so we were simulating it. But the time and cost savings were immense. And by the way, people said they preferred it in many cases to the live scenario. So just the fact that you can connect people from around the world, or if we have sessions, we can get people into a virtual space, somebody from Sweden, somebody from Japan, somebody from the United States, someone from Canada, and now we're all in a joint session. That's something you can't do in, you know, in a live action environment or in a real world environment. But it brings people together in ways that you couldn't do. So there's a really simple model. But then when you start getting into some of the GLTF stuff, like some of these files that are, you know, 3D, and you start creating content for immersive spaces, that's where I see the future. There's immense possibility, but somebody's got to invest in creating the content too. So that will happen, though. I think we're about, you know, 1 to 2 headsets away from having photorealistic avatars articulating in a way that's almost indistinguishable. And I think the universities, that will be the MO, like the classroom will be virtual. I just think the economics, the time savings, the functionality improvements eventually, once VR gets to the next level, just will be so compelling. You'll be able to do a university year, you know, like run a university course for $1,000 a year and probably make money, you know. That's how compelling I think it will be for the economics. So,
Okay.
so I'm an optimist.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Daniel. Although I have other questions, but yes, we are it's 1 p.m. and then we need to wrapping up. So is there anything else that you want to share, or so if not,
No, you have
final.
my email address. If people have any questions, feel free to call me. We're all academics here trying to share our information. So I'll send the latest PDF to Francesco after, and then yeah, feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Daniel, again, and the participants. So Francesco, if you have the final words, then yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, just very quickly, I would just like to thank you very much, Dr. Hawes, for that great presentation, and for being so open and sharing your slides and and studies with us. So thank you as well to Dr. Mohammadi for your help throughout this whole series and for moderating today's session. And thank you, of course, to our audience for being here, for taking the time to participate, watch, and ask questions. And as always, the sessions are recorded, and so they'll be up on our YouTube channel. I have shared our social media and YouTube channel links there in the chat for everybody. And as mentioned previously in the presentation, if you would like the slides to be shared with you, please send me an email, which I've also shared in the chat, and I will forward those slides to you. And yeah, and the recording, as always, will be available in a few hours after we end the session now. So with that said, thank you so much. And just as a reminder, this is a monthly series, so please be following us on our social medias to find out about the next sessions that will be coming up. And feel free to share them within your networks. If you're already registered, you will get the reminders automatically from Zoom. So thank you one last time to everybody, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Allowing me to share too. Thanks.